Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about something that's really personal and often kind of invisible. It's what we call the hidden toll of parentification. We're going to break down what that even means, how it shapes us, and how just understanding it can be that huge first step toward healing.
So let's just dive right in with a question that, man, it really gets to the core of it. Does this sound familiar to you? This feeling that you somehow skipped, like 15 chapters of your own childhood. Like you went straight from kid to mini adult, and all that stuff in the middle just vanished? If you're nodding along right now, then you are absolutely in the right place.
So what are we talking about here? Parentification. At its core, it's just a role reversal. A child ends up taking on responsibilities that belong to an adult. But, the most important part of this definition is that second sentence. This is not a personality flaw. It's a survival adaptation. It was a pretty brilliant way your brain figured out how to cope with a really tough environment.
Now, what's really interesting is that this can show up in two very different ways. First, there's emotional parentification. This is when a child becomes the emotional rock for an adult. Their little therapist, their best friend, sometimes even their marriage counselor. Then, on the other side, you've got instrumental parentification. This is all about the practical stuff, the tangible jobs of running a household, cooking, cleaning, taking care of younger siblings. Sometimes a kid experiences one, but a lot of the time, they get a mix of both.
So what was actually in those chapters you might have skipped? Well, some pretty big things actually, like the simple act of playing without having a ton of responsibility hanging over your head, the feeling of safety that comes from knowing you can truly depend on your caregivers, the freedom to just be messy with your emotions, and this is a huge one, the space to make carefree mistakes without feeling like the world is going to end. These aren't just nice things to have, they're the absolute building blocks of a childhood.
And this quote just nails the core misunderstanding, doesn't it? People might have told you, oh, you're so mature for your age, but that wasn't some natural fast-track development. It was a response to pressure. You weren't growing up faster, you were growing up under compression.
In that kind of pressure, it has a real biological impact. See, when a child's world feels constantly unstable, their brain, which is still developing, it adapts. It literally gets wired to exist in what feels like a permanent crisis mode.
Okay, so what does crisis mode actually feel like in your body? Well, it looks a lot like this. It's hypervigilance, that thing where you're constantly scanning a room, checking people's moods, reading into every tone of voice, just looking for a threat. It's about living 3 steps ahead of everyone else, always trying to anticipate problems so you can head them off. Your nervous system basically learns that normal means being on high alert 24/7.
And this might be the most profound consequence of it all. Think about it. If your main job as a kid was to always be on guard, then putting that guard down, well, that feels incredibly dangerous. Your body, on a fundamental level, learns to believe that relaxing is the same thing as taking a huge, unacceptable risk.
Which brings us to a question that so many people who've gone through this ask themselves. Why is it so ridiculously hard to just stop? Why does sitting on the couch and doing absolutely nothing feel so stressful that it triggers these waves of anxiety and guilt?
Well, the answer is this pretty vicious cycle. It all starts when you try to rest, but your nervous system, which is wired for crisis, starts screaming, danger. That signal then triggers a huge spike of anxiety and guilt, and to make those awful feelings go away, you go back to what feels safe. You get up and you get busy. And boom, the cycle just keeps repeating. So over time, this constant need to be doing and managing and fixing, it stops being just a behavior. It becomes your identity. You're not just a person who happens to be competent, you become the competent one, or the strong one, the person who holds it all together for everyone.
This identity is built on a few core beliefs. The very first pillar is this one: I have to handle everything. It's this deep-seated belief that you are the one who is solely and completely responsible for how every single situation turns out.
Then there's this second pillar, which raises the stakes even higher. It's not just that you should handle everything. It's the belief that if you don't, the consequences will be catastrophic. Your stability becomes the single pin holding the entire system together. No pressure, right?
And finally, the third pillar, which ties your very sense of self-worth to what you do. My value isn't just there. It comes from what I can do for other people. It comes from being useful. And man, that is an incredibly heavy burden to carry through life.
And what's so tricky about this whole thing is that this role, it was often praised. Adults would say things like, "You're just so responsible," or "I don't know what I would do without you." And of course, the big one, "You're so mature for your age." And all that external validation, it just cemented that identity even further.
But let's look at that a different way. That praise, even if it was well-intentioned, it wasn't really seeing a mature child. It was seeing a child who was adapting to survive. It was praise that, without meaning to, masked that child's deep unmet need for safety, for care, and for protection.
And it's so important to see that these childhood adaptations, they don't just magically disappear when you grow up. No, they evolve into adult patterns. Things like overfunctioning in relationships, finding it almost impossible to ask for help, being chronically exhausted, people-pleasing just to feel safe, and yeah, often attracting partners who need you to keep being the strong one.
Okay, I know that listening to all of this can feel really heavy. It's a lot to take in, but I need you to hear this, and it's super important. This is not a life sentence, not at all. What you did was a strategy, a brilliant one. And the great thing about strategies is that they can be updated. The way forward isn't about blowing up who you are. It's actually about starting with a brand new perspective on why you are the way you are.
Let's start with a new truth we can practice. That guilty feeling you get when you try to rest, it's based on a false alarm from the past. The truth is, rest is not neglect. It is a biological, psychological requirement for your survival. It's your fuel.
Here's the second truth. As a kid, yeah, you probably had to be useful to feel safe. But as an adult, that is no longer true. You have the power to create your own safety now, and that safety is not conditional. It doesn't depend on how productive you are or how much you do for others. And finally, this one might be the hardest one to really let sink in. After a whole lifetime of being the supporter, you are allowed to be supported. You're allowed to receive. You're allowed to lean on other people. It is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of being human.
So if you take just one thing away from all of this today, please let it be this. Give yourself the grace to understand that you were never too mature. You were a child doing the absolute best you could in a really hard situation. You were adapting to survive. And that adaptation, it's a testament to your incredible strength, not a definition of your future.